The morning rush at Starbucks on Fifth Avenue created a symphony of familiar sounds. Coffee machines hissed, cups clinked against saucers, and conversations blended into the comfortable hum of Manhattan waking up. Diana Chen sat at her usual corner table, fingers dancing across her laptop keyboard as she reviewed quarterly reports for her tech consulting business. "Excuse me, are you Diana Chen?" The voice was crisp and clear, with a nervous edge that made Diana look up from her screen. A young woman stood beside her table, heavily pregnant, probably 7 months along. She had blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun and wore a maternity dress that looked expensive but wrinkled, as if she had slept in it. "Yes, I am," Diana replied, her Boston accent subtle but noticeable. She closed her laptop halfway, giving the stranger her attention. "Can I help you?" The chair across from Diana scraped against the floor as the woman sat down without invitation. Papers rustled in her oversized purse as she searched for something, her hands shaking slightly. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. I think we need to talk about Richard." Diana's world shifted. The espresso machine hissed in the background, but suddenly it sounded like static. The morning rush crowd buzzed around them, but their voices seemed to fade away. Diana had been married to Richard Chen for 20 years. He was a millionaire tech entrepreneur, successful and driven. They had what everyone called the perfect marriage. "I'm sorry, what about Richard?" Diana asked, though something deep in her stomach already knew this conversation would change everything. Sarah placed her hand on her rounded belly. "Ma'am, I didn't know he was married when this started. I swear to you, I had no idea, but I'm carrying his baby." The words hit Diana like a physical blow. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. 20 years of marriage. 20 years of believing she knew the man she slept beside every night. "That's impossible," Diana said, her voice measured despite the chaos in her mind. "Richard and I are trying to have a baby. We've been to fertility specialists. He wouldn't." Sarah's face crumpled. "He told me you couldn't have children. He said you'd given up trying years ago. He said your marriage was basically over, that you were just living like roommates." Diana felt nauseous. The familiar sounds of the coffee shop became overwhelming. A businessman at the next table was arguing loudly into his phone. A barista called out drink orders. Someone's chair squeaked every time they moved. "When did this start?" Diana asked quietly. 8 months ago. We met at a conference in Austin. I work in marketing for a startup down there. He was so charming, so attentive. He kept flying down to see me, said he was expanding his business in Texas." Sarah wiped her eyes with a napkin. "I moved to New York 2 months ago because he asked me to. He got me an apartment in Soho, said we'd be together soon." Diana's mind raced through the past 8 months. Richard's sudden interest in the Texas market, his frequent business trips, the way he started taking phone calls in his home office with the door closed. "Why are you telling me this now?" Diana asked. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "Because I went to the doctor yesterday. The baby's due in 2 months, and Richard keeps making excuses about why he can't come to appointments. Yesterday I asked him directly when he was going to tell his wife about us, and he said—" She paused, fresh tears starting. "He said he never planned to leave you, that I was just temporary." The coffee shop sounds swirled around Diana like she was underwater. She thought about her husband, Richard Chen, 55 years old, brilliant and successful. The man who brought her flowers every Friday for 20 years. The man who held her while she cried after every failed pregnancy test. "I have ultrasound pictures," Sarah said softly, pulling a folder from her purse. "And text messages. I'm not lying to you." Diana looked at the black and white images Sarah placed on the table. There was definitely a baby in those pictures. A baby that looked remarkably like Richard had as an infant, based on the photos his mother had shown Diana years ago. "What do you want from me?" Diana asked. "I want him to take responsibility," Sarah replied, her Texas accent becoming more pronounced as her emotions heightened. "I want him to support this child. I want him to stop lying to both of us." Diana stared at the ultrasound photos. In one image, she could see tiny fingers. In another, a profile that did look remarkably familiar. Mrs. Chen, Sarah continued, I know this is horrible for you. I know you must hate me, but I'm 28 years old. I'm alone in a city where I don't know anyone, and the father of my baby is pretending I don't exist. Diana looked up from the pictures. This young woman had nervous energy, the kind that came from desperation and fear. She was beautiful in that fresh-faced way that only women in their 20s possessed. Her skin was clear, her eyes bright despite the tears. Diana thought about herself at 28, full of dreams and trust in the world. Does anyone else know about this? Diana asked. My mama back in Dallas, and my doctor here. That's it. Richard made me promise not to tell anyone until after the baby was born. He said it would complicate things. Diana's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Richard, working late tonight. Don't wait up. Love you. She showed the message to Sarah, who let out a bitter laugh. He's supposed to take me to dinner tonight. We've had the reservation for weeks. Diana's world tilted as the words sank in. 20 years. 20 years of believing she knew the man she married. 20 years of thinking they were partners, best friends, soulmates. 20 years of building a life with someone who was apparently living a completely different life behind her back. She gathered the ultrasound pictures and handed them back to Sarah. I need to go home and talk to my husband. Mrs. Chen, Sarah called as Diana stood to leave. I'm sorry. I really am. Diana turned back. Looking at this pregnant young woman, she felt an unexpected surge of sympathy. Sarah wasn't the enemy here. Sarah was just another woman who had been lied to by the same man. What's your phone number? Diana asked. In case I need to reach you. Sarah quickly wrote her number on a napkin and handed it over. Diana folded it carefully and put it in her purse. As Diana walked out of the Starbucks and into the busy Manhattan morning, she realized that everything she thought she knew about her life had just changed forever. 3 hours later, Diana sat in her Tesla in the driveway of their Westchester home. The house looked the same as it had that morning when she left for her coffee meeting with a potential client. Colonial style, perfectly landscaped, with a 3-car garage and professionally maintained garden. It was the kind of house that appeared in magazines about successful couples living the American dream. But now she saw it differently. Now she wondered how many lies had been told within these walls. Richard's BMW was parked in its usual spot. He was home early, which was unusual for a Tuesday. Diana gripped the steering wheel and tried to organize her thoughts. She was a logical person, a problem solver by nature. Her tech consulting business succeeded because she could analyze complex situations and find clear solutions. But this felt unsolvable. She walked through the front door and heard Richard on the phone in his office. His voice was cheerful, professional. He was talking to someone about quarterly projections and market expansion in the Southwest. Diana hung her purse on the hook by the door and listened. The Austin market has incredible potential, Richard was saying. I've been spending a lot of time down there, really getting to know the landscape. Diana's stomach clenched. She walked into the kitchen and started making coffee. Though she'd already had plenty at Starbucks, she needed something to do with her hands. Diana, is that you? Richard called from his office. Yes, she replied, her voice sounding normal despite everything. I'm home. Richard appeared in the kitchen doorway, smiling. He was still handsome at 55, with distinguished gray at his temples and the kind of confidence that came from decades of success. He wore an expensive suit that fit perfectly, and his shoes were Italian leather. How was your meeting? He asked, kissing her cheek. His aftershave was the same one he'd worn for years, familiar and comforting. Interesting, Diana replied. Richard, we need to talk. Something in her tone made him pause. His smile flickered slightly, but he recovered quickly. Of course. Let me just finish this call with the West Coast team. Give me 10 minutes. No, Diana said firmly. We need to talk now. Richard looked at her more carefully. His deep voice took on the slightly impatient tone he used when business was interrupted by personal matters. Diana, is everything okay? You seem upset. I met Sarah Mitchell today. The change in Richard's expression was immediate and telling. His face went pale, then flushed red. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it. He looked exactly like someone who had been caught in a lie. "I don't know what you mean," he said finally. Diana pulled out her phone and showed him Sarah's number, which she had already saved as a contact. "She's pregnant. Richard. She's carrying your baby." Richard stared at the phone, then at Diana. For a moment, he looked like he might deny everything. Then his phone buzzed on the granite countertop. They both looked at the screen. The text message was visible. "Still on for dinner tonight. Been looking forward to it all week. Baby's kicking like crazy. Sarah." The silence stretched between them. Diana could hear the refrigerator humming, the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, and the distant sound of traffic on the main road. "Richard," Diana said quietly, "tell me the truth." He sat down heavily at the kitchen island. For the first time in 20 years, he looked older than his age. The confidence was gone, replaced by something that looked like defeat. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he said. "What wasn't supposed to happen like this? The affair, the pregnancy, or getting caught, any of it." He rubbed his face with his hands. "Diana, I never meant for this to happen. Sarah was just, she was young and exciting, and she made me feel like I was 30 again." Diana felt a surge of anger so strong it surprised her. "She made you feel 30 again. What does that make me? What does that make our marriage?" "Our marriage is solid," Richard said quickly. "This thing with Sarah, it's just sex. It doesn't mean anything." "She's having your baby." "Richard, how does that not mean anything? I know how it looks, but listen to me." Richard's voice took on the persuasive tone he used in business negotiations. "Sarah is young and confused. She thinks she's in love with me, but it's just infatuation. The baby complicates things, but we can handle this quietly. I'll support the child financially, but it doesn't have to change anything between us." Diana stared at her husband. This man she had loved for 20 years was talking about his pregnant mistress like she was a business problem to be managed. "How long has this been going on?" Diana asked. 8 months. "But Diana, please understand, it's not emotional. It's not like what we have." "What do we have, Richard? Because right now I'm not sure I know." Richard reached for her hands. "We have 20 years together. We have this house, our friends, our life. We have history and partnership and love. Sarah is just, she's just a mistake." Diana pulled her hands away. "A mistake that's about to have your baby in 2 months. I'll take care of it," Richard said. "I'll handle everything. You don't have to worry about any of this. Handle it how she's a person, Richard. She's a young woman who thinks she's in a relationship with you. She moved to New York because you asked her to." Richard's face hardened. She knew what this was. "I never promised her anything permanent." Diana felt like she was seeing her husband clearly for the first time. There was a coldness in his voice when he talked about Sarah that chilled her. "Did you tell her our marriage was over?" Diana asked. "Did you tell her we were just roommates?" Richard looked away. "I may have given her the impression that we weren't close anymore." "You lied to her." "I told her what she needed to hear." Diana stood up abruptly. "What she needed to hear, Richard. Do you understand what you've done? You've been lying to me for 8 months. You've been lying to her for 8 months. You've been living a double life. Diana, please don't make this bigger than it is. We can work through this. Couples survive affairs all the time. Do they survive secret babies?" Richard was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, more vulnerable. "I know I screwed up. I know this is terrible, but I love you, Diana. I love our life together. I don't want to lose you over a stupid mistake." Diana looked at this man she had shared her life with for 2 decades. She thought about all the times he had comforted her when fertility treatments failed. All the times he had told her they were enough for each other, that they didn't need children to be complete. "I need some air," she said. "Diana, don't leave. Let's talk about this." "I'm not leaving. I'm going for a walk around the neighborhood, but when I get back, I want to know everything. No more lies. Richard, if we're going to figure this out, I need to know the whole truth. As Diana walked out the front door, she realized that the relief she felt about Richard finally being honest was already fading, because now she had to figure out what came next. And for the first time in 20 years, she had no idea what her future looked like. The next morning, Diana found herself in a glass tower overlooking Central Park. Margaret Torres's law office was on the 42nd floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that made Manhattan look like a miniature city below. Diana had never needed a divorce attorney before, but Elena Vasquez, her best friend since college, had insisted on making the appointment. "You need to know where you stand legally," Elena had said the night before, her warm Puerto Rican accent thick with concern. "Before you make any decisions about your marriage, you need to understand your options." Margaret Torres was 58 years old with silver hair and a sharp New York accent that matched her direct manner. She spoke in clipped sentences that wasted no words, and Diana found her efficiency both reassuring and intimidating. 20 years of marriage, Margaret said, reviewing the papers Diana had brought. Prenuptial agreement signed in 2004. No children together. Diana winced at that last phrase. After years of fertility struggles, it still hurt to hear it stated so matter-of-factly. "Tell me about your husband's business," Margaret continued, her pen clicking rhythmically as she made notes. "Richard owns a tech consulting firm that specializes in software development for financial services companies. He started it 15 years ago, and it's grown significantly. We have offices in New York, Boston, and he's been expanding into Texas." Margaret's eyebrows raised. Texas expansion. When did that start? About 8 months ago, Diana realized how obvious the timeline was. Everything kept coming back to 8 months ago. "And your business?" "I have my own tech consulting practice, smaller scale, mostly serving mid-sized companies with their digital transformation needs. I've been running it for 10 years. Margaret shuffled through papers, her movements precise and practiced. "According to this prenup, you're entitled to $2 million in the event of divorce, plus this house if it's your primary residence. But that was based on his net worth in 2004. What's he worth now? Based on the financial documents you've provided, I'd estimate Richard's current net worth at approximately $50 million. Diana felt like the air had been knocked out of her lungs. 50 million? That can't be right. His company went through a major expansion in the last 5 years. The Texas market alone has been incredibly lucrative for him. This isn't his first affair. Honey." The room suddenly felt very cold. "What do you mean?" Margaret pulled out a manila folder. "I had my investigator do some preliminary research last night after you called. Richard Chen has a pattern. There were settlements in 2008 and 2015, confidential settlements with 2 different women." Diana gripped the arms of her chair. "He paid other women $50,000 in 2008, $200,000 in 2015. Both involved non-disclosure agreements." The sounds of the city 42 floors below seemed to fade away. Diana thought about all the business trips, the late nights, the phone calls he took in the other room. She had trusted him completely, never questioned his explanations. "The prenup limits you to $2 million, Margaret continued, "but that's only if the divorce is uncontested and there's no fault involved. Adultery, especially with financial deception, changes everything." "How does it change things?" "New York is a no-fault divorce state, but infidelity can still impact financial settlements, especially when there's been financial deception or hidden assets. If we can prove he's been hiding money or using marital assets to support his affairs, we can challenge the prenup." Diana stared out the window at Central Park. Tiny people walked along paths that looked like thin lines from this height. She wondered how many of them were dealing with life-changing revelations about the people they loved. "There's something else," Margaret said gently. "The young woman he's involved with now, Sarah Mitchell. She could be a key witness if she's willing to testify about his promises and financial support." I don't want to hurt her more than she's already been hurt, Diana said. That's admirable, but you need to think about protecting yourself. If Richard has $50 million and you're only entitled to $2 million after 20 years of marriage, that's not equitable. Diana thought about her conversation with Richard the night before. After she returned from her walk, he had been more forthcoming about the details of his affair with Sarah. He had admitted to paying for her apartment, her medical expenses, and her living costs. He had promised her things about their future together that he now claimed he never meant. "What if I don't want a divorce?" Diana asked. Margaret studied her carefully. "That's your choice, of course, but I need to ask you something, and I want you to really think about your answer. Do you believe this affair with Sarah is truly over? Do you believe there won't be others?" Diana was quiet for a long moment. She thought about Richard's coldness when discussing Sarah, the way he called her a mistake and talked about handling the situation. She thought about the pattern Margaret had just revealed, the other women, the other settlements. "I don't know," Diana said finally. "I thought I knew him completely, but now I realize I don't know him at all. Here's what I recommend," Margaret said. "Don't make any big decisions right now, but protect yourself. I'm going to have my investigator do a complete financial analysis. We need to know exactly what assets exist and how they've been acquired. We also need to document his relationship with Sarah, including any financial support he's provided." "What about Sarah? What's her legal position?" "She can file for child support once the baby is born. If Richard tries to deny paternity, we can force a DNA test. But her real leverage is what she knows about his financial situation and the promises he made to her." Diana gathered her purse and stood to leave. The city spread out below her. Millions of people living their lives, dealing with their own complications and betrayals. "Mrs. Chen," Margaret said as Diana reached the door, "20 years is a long time to be married. You don't have to decide anything today or tomorrow, but you deserve to know the truth about your financial situation and your options." As Diana rode the elevator down 42 floors, she realized that her marriage wasn't just broken. It had been built on lies that went back years, maybe decades, and now she had to decide whether to try to rebuild it or start over completely. The elevator doors opened onto the busy lobby, and Diana walked back into her changed world. That evening, Diana's phone rang as she stirred pasta sauce that would go uneaten. Richard had left for his office an hour earlier, claiming he needed to handle some crisis with a client. Diana suspected he was actually canceling dinner plans with Sarah, trying to limit the damage from their confrontation. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. Diana almost ignored it, but something made her answer. "Mrs. Chen, this is Dr. Patricia Williams. I'm an obstetrician at Mount Sinai Hospital." Diana's stomach clenched. "Yes, this is difficult to say, but Sarah Mitchell listed you as an emergency contact. She collapsed at work this afternoon and was brought to our emergency room." Diana set down the wooden spoon and gripped the phone tighter. "Is she okay? Is the baby okay?" "She's stable now, but she's developed a serious infection. We're treating her with antibiotics, but her condition is concerning. She's asking for you specifically." "For me, not for Richard. She says she can't reach the baby's father, and you're the only other person she knows in New York. Mrs. Chen, I know this situation must be complicated, but she's alone and frightened." Diana looked around her kitchen, at the pasta sauce cooling on the stove, at the dinner table set for two. Her life had become unrecognizable in less than 24 hours. "What kind of infection?" Diana asked. "It appears to have started from some minor scratches on her arms. Normally these wouldn't be serious, but pregnancy can compromise the immune system. The infection has progressed to sepsis, which puts both mother and baby at risk." Diana's mind flashed back to the coffee shop. She remembered Sarah reaching into her purse, how nervous and shaky she had been. Had Diana somehow caused those scratches during their conversation? She couldn't remember any physical contact, but the whole encounter had been so emotionally charged. "I'll be right there," Diana said. "She's in room 407 in the maternity ward." Diana grabbed her purse and keys, then hesitated. Should she call Richard? He needed to know his pregnant mistress was in the hospital, but part of her didn't want to give him the chance to control the situation, to manage it like another business crisis. She decided to go to the hospital first and call Richard from there. Mount Sinai Hospital at night was a different world from the one she knew during daytime visits. The halls were dimmer, quieter, with the sounds of medical equipment creating a constant electronic symphony. Nurses moved with practiced efficiency, their soft-soled shoes squeaking on polished floors. Diana found room 407 and knocked softly on the partially open door. "Come in," came Sarah's voice, hoarse and weak. Sarah looked pale and small in the hospital bed. Her blonde hair was stringy with sweat, and there were dark circles under her eyes. An IV line ran into her left arm, and monitors beeped steadily beside the bed. "You came," Sarah said, and her southern drawl was more pronounced than it had been in the coffee shop. "Of course I came." Diana sat in the chair beside the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck. The doctor says the baby's okay for now, but my white blood cell count is really high." Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Chen, I know this is weird, having you here. Call me Diana. And it's not weird. You're alone and scared, and no one should go through this by herself." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I tried calling Richard, but his phone goes straight to voicemail. I left 3 messages." Diana felt a familiar surge of anger at her husband. Whether or not he wanted to deal with his affair, Sarah was still carrying his child, and she was still a human being who deserved basic decency. "I'll make sure he knows where you are," Diana said. "The doctor asked me about the scratches on my arms," Sarah said quietly. "She wanted to know how I got them." Diana looked at Sarah's arms and saw several thin scratches, some of which had been covered with antibiotic ointment. They didn't look severe, but infection was always a risk, especially for pregnant women. "I don't remember you having those yesterday," Diana said. "I got them at work this morning. I was so upset after talking to you that I wasn't paying attention. I walked into a storage room and got scratched by some metal shelving." Sarah looked embarrassed. "It was stupid. I was crying and not watching where I was going." "Sarah, this isn't your fault. Sometimes infections just happen." "Mrs. Chen." "Diana. Can I ask you something?" "Of course. What are you going to do about Richard? I mean, about all of this?" Diana was quiet for a moment. The monitors beeped steadily, and she could hear hushed conversations in the hallway outside. "I honestly don't know," Diana said. 24 hours ago, I thought I had a good marriage. Now I find out my husband has been living a double life for months. He told me y'all were practically divorced already. He said you lived like roommates, that there was no love left between you. That's not true. At least, it wasn't true for me. I thought we were happy." Sarah turned her head to look directly at Diana. "He said you couldn't have children, that you'd given up trying years ago." Diana felt the familiar ache that came with discussions of her fertility struggles. "We tried for 15 years, multiple rounds of IVF, fertility treatments, everything. It just never happened for us." "I'm sorry," Sarah said softly. "That must have been so hard." "It was, but I thought Richard and I had made peace with it. I thought we were enough for each other." Sarah was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "He said he'd leave you after the baby was born. He said we'd be a family." Diana closed her eyes. The cruelty of Richard's lies was breathtaking. He had given Sarah hope for a future that he apparently never intended to provide, while simultaneously destroying the marriage Diana thought was solid. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and please be honest. Do you love him?" "I thought I did, but love isn't supposed to involve this much lying. Is it? Love isn't supposed to make you feel like you have to hide and sneak around?" Sarah touched her belly. "I love this baby, though. This baby is real and innocent and deserves better than all this mess." Just then, Diana's phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Where are you? Dinner's getting cold." Diana showed the message to Sarah, who let out a bitter laugh that turned into a cough. "He's worried about dinner getting cold while I'm lying here fighting an infection that could kill his baby," Sarah said. Diana typed back, Sarah's in the hospital, Mount Sinai, room 407. She has sepsis. Her phone rang immediately. Diana, what's going on? Why are you at the hospital? Because your pregnant girlfriend collapsed at work and listed me as her emergency contact since she couldn't reach you. I'll be right there. As Diana hung up, she looked at Sarah, who was watching her with a mixture of gratitude and exhaustion. He's coming, Diana said. Thank you for being here. I know this is probably the last place you want to be. Diana surprised herself by reaching over and squeezing Sarah's hand gently. You're right. This is the last place I want to be, but you shouldn't be alone. Through the hospital room window, Diana could see the lights of Manhattan stretching into the distance. Somewhere in those lights were millions of other people dealing with their own crises, their own betrayals, their own unexpected pregnancies and failing marriages. But right now, in this sterile room with its beeping monitors and antiseptic smell, two women who should have been enemies were finding something like understanding. In the sterile brightness of Mount Sinai Hospital, Diana found herself in the strangest situation of her life. She was sitting beside the hospital bed of her husband's pregnant mistress, waiting for that same husband to arrive, while monitoring machines tracked the vital signs of a baby that should have been impossible. Sarah had drifted off to sleep, her breathing shallow but steady. The antibiotics were working, according to the nurse who had checked on them 20 minutes earlier, but it would be touch and go for the next few hours. Diana studied Sarah's face in the dim light. She was beautiful, but it was more than that. There was an innocence about her, even in sleep, that made Diana understand how Richard had been drawn to her. She looked like someone who still believed in happy endings. The sound of familiar footsteps in the hallway made Diana look up. Richard appeared in the doorway, still wearing his expensive suit but looking disheveled. His tie was loose, and his usually perfect hair was messed up, as if he'd been running his hands through it. "How is she?" he asked quietly. "Stable. The infection is responding to antibiotics, but the doctor says the next few hours are critical." Richard approached the bed, and Diana watched his face as he looked at Sarah. There was concern there, but also something else. Guilt, maybe, or frustration at having his careful compartmentalization disrupted. "The baby," he asked. "Heart rate is strong, but if the infection gets worse?" Richard nodded and sat in the other chair on the opposite side of the bed. For several minutes, they sat in silence. Two people who had been married for 20 years, watching over a pregnant woman who had changed everything between them. "I've been trying to figure out how to handle this," Richard said finally. "Handle this. She's not a business problem. Richard, she's a person. I know that. But Diana, we need to think practically about what comes next." Sarah stirred and opened her eyes. When she saw Richard, her face lit up with relief and something that looked like love. "You came," she said, her voice hoarse but stronger than before. "Of course I came. How are you feeling?" "Better. The antibiotics are helping." Sarah looked between Richard and Diana. "I can't believe you're both here." "Where else would we be?" Diana said, surprising herself with how natural it felt to include herself in that statement. Sarah struggled to sit up a little, and Richard automatically moved to help her adjust her pillows. The gesture was tender and familiar, and Diana realized they had done this before. This wasn't the first time Sarah had needed care during her pregnancy. "Richard," Sarah said, "I need to tell you something, and Diana should hear it too." Richard's face tensed. "Sarah, you should rest. We can talk about everything later." "No, I need to say this now." Sarah took a shaky breath. "I know you said y'all were practically divorced already, but that's not true, is it?" Richard glanced at Diana, then back at Sarah. "It's complicated." "It's not complicated," Sarah said, her Texas accent becoming more pronounced as her emotions heightened. "You lied to me. You told me your marriage was over. You told me we'd be together after the baby was born. But you never had any intention of leaving, Diana. Did you?" The room was quiet except for the steady beeping of monitors and the distant sounds of the hospital. "Sarah," Richard said carefully, "you're upset and tired. This isn't the time for this conversation." "When is the time, Richard?" "When the baby's born," when I'm struggling to raise your child alone while you go back to your perfect life with your wife. Diana watched this exchange with fascination and heartbreak. Sarah was fighting for a future with a man who had never intended to give her one, while Diana was trying to figure out if she wanted a future with a man who had betrayed them both. "Sarah," Diana said gently, "what exactly did Richard promise you?" Sarah looked at her with grateful eyes. "He said he'd tell you about us after the baby was born. He said it would be easier then, that you'd understand. He got me the apartment in Soho and said it was temporary, that we'd get a place together once everything was settled." "I never said we'd live together," Richard protested. "You did say that," Sarah replied firmly. "You said we'd be a family. You said this baby deserved to have both parents." Diana felt a chill. "Richard, did you promise to leave me?" Richard ran his hands through his hair. "I may have implied that our relationship had a future, but I never made specific promises." "You're doing it again," Sarah said, her voice getting stronger. "You're twisting words, making it sound like I imagined everything. But I have the text messages. Richard, I have the voicemails where you talked about our future together." Just then, the door opened and a woman in her 50s entered. She had Sarah's blonde hair and the same determined set to her jaw, but her eyes were harder, more experienced. "Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell. What in the Sam Hill is going on here?" the woman said, her Texas accent thick and no nonsense. "Mama," Sarah looked shocked. "How did you get here? You called me crying yesterday about some married man, and then your roommate calls me today saying you're in the hospital in New York City. I got on the first plane I could find." The woman's eyes swept the room, taking in Richard in his expensive suit and Diana in her designer clothes. "Which one of y'all is the husband?" "Mama, this is Richard, and this is Diana, his wife." Betty Mitchell, Sarah's mother, looked at the situation with the shrewd assessment of a woman who had seen her share of men who made promises they didn't intend to keep. "So you're the married man who got my daughter pregnant," she said to Richard. "Mrs. Mitchell, I understand you're upset, but this is a complex situation," Richard began. "Complex?" Betty interrupted. "Seems pretty simple to me. You're married to one woman and having a baby with another? What's complex about that?" Diana found herself liking Betty Mitchell immediately. "Mrs. Mitchell," Diana said, "I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances." Betty studied Diana carefully. "You knew about this. I found out yesterday. And you're here anyway." Diana paused. Why was she here a day ago? She would have said it was because she was a decent person who wouldn't leave a pregnant woman alone in the hospital. But now she realized it was more complicated than that. "Sarah shouldn't be alone," Diana said finally. Betty nodded approvingly. "Well, at least one person in this room has some sense." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Sarah was looking increasingly tired. Richard was obviously uncomfortable, and Betty was studying everyone like a detective gathering evidence. "Richard," Sarah said quietly, "I need to know something, and I need you to tell me the truth for once. Do you love me?" The question hung in the air. Diana found herself holding her breath, waiting for the answer. Richard was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful and measured. "Sarah, you're a wonderful person, and what we had together was special. But love is complicated. What matters now is taking care of you and the baby." It wasn't an answer, and everyone in the room knew it. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of anger and realization. "You never loved me," she said. "You just wanted the excitement of someone young and new, and when it got complicated, you decided to manage me like a business problem." "That's not fair," Richard said. "Fair." Betty Mitchell spoke up. "You want to talk about fair would have been telling my daughter you were married before you got her pregnant. Fair would have been not lying to your wife for 8 months." Diana watched Richard struggle to maintain control of a situation that was spiraling away from him. This was a man used to being in charge, used to having solutions for every problem. But pregnancy and love and betrayal weren't business problems that could be solved with the right strategy. I think, Diana said quietly, that we all need to focus on Sarah and the baby right now. Everything else can wait until she's better. Sarah reached out and squeezed Diana's hand. Thank you for everything. As Diana squeezed back, she realized that in the space of 24 hours, she had gained an ally in the most unexpected place. And for the first time since this all began, she didn't feel completely alone. Diana stepped into the hospital cafeteria and froze. Richard was standing near the vending machines, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice low but urgent. She was about to approach him when something in his tone made her stop and listen. We need to control this narrative, Richard was saying, his voice cold and calculating in a way Diana had never heard before. If this gets out the wrong way, it could destroy everything. Diana stepped behind a pillar, her heart pounding. Richard continued talking, oblivious to her presence. Make it look like the wife went crazy. Attack the pregnant girl. Diana's been unstable since her fertility problems. She's always been jealous of younger women. Diana's breath caught in her throat. She pressed herself against the pillar, straining to hear more. Jackson, I don't care how you spin it, but I need Sarah to look like the victim and Diana to look like the aggressor. The scratches on Sarah's arms, the infection, all of it needs to point back to Diana having some kind of breakdown. There was a pause while the person on the other end spoke. No, of course Diana didn't actually attack her. But perception is reality. And right now we need people to believe that Sarah is an innocent victim of a jealous wife's rage. Richard's voice was getting more animated. This is my company's reputation we're talking about. I can't have people thinking I'm some kind of serial cheater. Diana felt sick. Her husband was not only planning to blame her for Sarah's condition, but he was actively working to destroy her reputation to protect his own. Get ahead of this story, Richard continued. I want headlines that read, Millionaire's wife attacks pregnant mistress, not tech CEO's secret double life exposed. Do whatever it takes. Diana carefully backed away from the pillar and slipped out of the cafeteria. Her hands were shaking as she made her way back to Sarah's room. Betty Mitchell was sitting beside her daughter's bed, holding her hand and speaking in low, comforting tones. Mrs. Mitchell, Diana said quietly, could I speak with you in the hallway? Betty followed her out of the room, her expression concerned. What is it, honey? You look like you've seen a ghost. I just overheard Richard on the phone with what sounded like a publicist. He's planning to blame me for Sarah's condition. He wants to make it look like I attacked her out of jealousy. Betty's face hardened. That son of a bitch. I don't know what to do. I never hurt Sarah. The scratches on her arms came from metal shelving at her work. But if Richard spins this the right way, he could make you look like some kind of crazy woman while he comes off as the victim of an unstable wife. Betty finished. I've seen men like him before. They're all charm and smiles until they get caught, and then they'll throw anyone under the bus to save themselves. Diana felt overwhelmed. I should call my lawyer. Yes, you should. But first, we need to protect Sarah. If he's willing to destroy you to save his reputation, what do you think he'll do to her? Before Diana could answer, her phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Diana Chen, this is Marcus Rodriguez from the New York Post. We understand you're involved in a situation with your husband and a pregnant woman. Would you like to comment? Diana hung up immediately, but her phone started ringing again almost instantly. Different number, different reporter. How did they get my number so fast? Diana asked. Because your husband's publicist is good at his job, Betty said grimly. He's probably already fed them a story about you being unstable and dangerous. Diana's phone continued to buzz with calls and texts. When she looked at the messages, her worst fears were confirmed. Looking for comment on assault allegations. Sources say you have history of mental health issues. Hospital sources confirm pregnant woman's injuries. This is happening so fast, Diana said, feeling panicked. Honey, you need to get in front of this right now. Call your lawyer. Call anyone who can help you. But don't let him control the narrative. Diana nodded and stepped away to make some calls. First, she called Margaret Torres, her divorce attorney. Margaret, I need help. Richard is trying to frame me for Sarah's condition. He's talking to reporters and making it sound like I attacked her. Slow down, Margaret said. Tell me exactly what happened. Diana explained about overhearing Richard's phone call, about the reporters already calling her, about the way the story was being spun. This is serious, Margaret said when Diana finished. If he's successful in painting you as unstable or violent, it could affect any divorce proceedings. We need to document everything. Do you have any proof that you didn't cause Sarah's injuries? She told me herself that she got the scratches at work, and there should be security cameras at her workplace. Good. What about the hospital? Do they have any record of how she described getting the injuries? I think so. The doctor asked her about them specifically. I'm calling my investigator right now. We need medical records, security footage, anything that proves your version of events. And Diana, don't talk to any reporters until we figure out how to handle this. After she hung up with Margaret, Diana called her sister Jennifer, the pediatrician. Jen, I need your help. Something terrible is happening. Diana explained the situation, and Jennifer listened without interrupting. Diana, this is serious. If reporters are already calling, it means someone has fed them a complete story. You need to be very careful about how you respond. I don't know how to respond. I've never dealt with anything like this. First, don't respond to any reporters until you have legal advice. Second, document everything you can remember about your interactions with Sarah. Write it all down while it's still fresh in your memory. When Diana returned to Sarah's room, she found Sarah awake and agitated. Betty was holding her phone, her face grim. What's wrong? Diana asked. Someone's been calling Sarah too, Betty said. Reporters. They're asking her about being attacked by you. Sarah looked confused and upset. Diana, I told them you never hurt me. I told them the scratches came from work, but they kept asking leading questions, like they already had a story written and just wanted me to confirm it. Diana sat down heavily in the chair beside the bed. Sarah, I need to tell you something. I overheard Richard on the phone. He's the one feeding this story to the press. He's trying to make it look like I attacked you to protect his own reputation. Sarah's face went white. He's what? He's telling reporters that I'm unstable, that I attacked you out of jealousy. He wants people to think you're the innocent victim of a crazy wife. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. When she spoke, her voice was stronger than Diana had heard it since the hospital. So he's not just willing to abandon me and the baby. He's willing to destroy both of us to save himself. It looks that way. Sarah looked at her mother, then at Diana. What do we do? Betty Mitchell stood up, her expression determined. We fight back, and we make sure the real story gets told. Diana felt a spark of hope for the first time since this nightmare began. Maybe she wasn't as alone as she thought. Maybe, together, they could find a way to expose Richard's lies and protect themselves. But first, they had to survive whatever story was about to break in the morning papers. Diana's phone buzzed with calls from reporters, but she ignored them all. Instead, she sat in the hospital waiting room with Betty Mitchell, working on a plan. Sarah was sleeping again, her condition stable but still concerning enough that the doctors wanted to monitor her overnight. The first thing we need, Betty said, is proof that Sarah's injuries didn't come from you. Where does she work? A marketing startup in Soho. She mentioned metal shelving in a storage room. Betty was already pulling out her phone. Sarah, honey, wake up for just a minute. Sarah opened her eyes, still groggy from the medication. Baby girl, I need the name and address of your office. We need to get security footage from yesterday morning. Sarah rattled off the information, and Betty immediately called the building management company. Her approach was direct and effective. This is Betty Mitchell. My daughter works for one of your tenants and was injured in your building yesterday morning. We need a copy of the security footage for insurance purposes. Diana listened, impressed by Betty's no-nonsense efficiency. Yes, I understand there are procedures, but my daughter is currently hospitalized with a serious infection from those injuries, and we need that footage before it gets automatically deleted. After 20 minutes of persistent negotiation, Betty had secured a promise that the footage would be preserved and made available the next morning. Now, Betty said, hanging up, we need someone who knows how to deal with the media. These reporters aren't going to stop calling. Diana's phone rang again. This time it was Elena Vasquez. Girl, what is going on? I just saw something online about you and Richard and some pregnant woman. Elena, it's complicated. Can you come to Mount Sinai Hospital? I need help. I'm already in my car. Elena Vasquez arrived 45 minutes later, bringing with her a calm energy that Diana desperately needed. She was 45 years old with warm brown eyes and the kind of presence that made people feel safe. She spoke slowly and thoughtfully, her Puerto Rican accent soft and comforting. Tell me everything, Elena said, settling into a chair beside Diana and Betty. Diana explained the entire situation from the beginning, starting with Sarah appearing at the coffee shop and ending with Richard's plan to blame her for Sarah's condition. That bastard, Elena said when Diana finished. Sorry, Mrs. Mitchell, but your daughter's baby daddy is a real piece of work. No apology necessary, Betty replied. I've been thinking the same thing. Diana, you need more than just a divorce lawyer. You need someone who understands public relations and media management. Elena pulled out her phone and made a call. Mike, it's Elena. I need a favor. She explained the situation briefly. Can you meet us at Mount Sinai tonight? Good, bring whatever equipment you need to document everything. Who's Mike? Diana asked. Mike Rodriguez? He's a private investigator, but he used to work in corporate security. He knows how to handle situations like this. An hour later, Mike Rodriguez arrived. He was 44 years old with a Brooklyn accent and the kind of streetwise intelligence that came from years of dealing with people's worst moments. He carried a briefcase full of recording equipment and legal documents. Okay, ladies, here's what we're going to do, Mike said after Diana had told her story one more time. First, we document everything. Diana, I need you to write down every interaction you've had with Sarah, with exact times and locations when possible. He handed Diana a legal pad. Mrs. Mitchell, I need you to do the same thing for every conversation you've had with your daughter about this situation. What about Sarah? Betty asked. When she's feeling better, I need her to give me a detailed statement about her relationship with Richard, including any promises he made, any money he gave her, and exactly how she got those scratches. Mike opened his briefcase and pulled out a small recording device. Sarah, if you're up for it, I'd like to record your statement. That way, if Richard or his people try to twist your words later, we have proof of what you actually said. Sarah nodded weakly. I want to help. I don't want him to hurt Diana because of me. For the next 2 hours, they systematically documented everything. Sarah, despite her exhaustion, gave a clear and detailed account of her relationship with Richard. She described the promises he had made, the apartment he had rented for her, the money he had given her for living expenses and medical care. He said he loved me, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. He said we were going to be a family. He said Diana was just a roommate to him, that their marriage had been over for years. Did he ever say anything about leaving his wife? Mike asked. All the time. He said he was waiting for the right moment, that he didn't want to hurt her more than necessary. He made it sound like he was being kind by waiting. Diana listened to this with a mixture of pain and anger. The depth of Richard's deception was staggering. Sarah, Mike continued, tell me exactly how you got the scratches on your arms. I was at work yesterday morning. After meeting Diana at the coffee shop, I was really upset, crying, not paying attention to where I was going. I went into the storage room to get some supplies, and I walked into a metal shelving unit. The edges were sharp, and I scraped my arms. Was anyone else there who saw this happen? My coworker Jessica, she helped me clean up the scratches and put bandages on them. Mike made notes. We'll need to talk to Jessica. And we'll need that security footage. By midnight, they had a comprehensive record of events that completely contradicted Richard's version of the story. Diana felt exhausted but more hopeful than she had since this nightmare began. "What happens next?" Diana asked. "Next, we get ahead of the story," Mike said. "Richard's publicist is good, but he's working with lies. We're working with the truth, and truth has a way of winning if you present it right." Elena squeezed Diana's hand. "Girl, we're going to fight this thing. You're not alone." Betty nodded approvingly. "My daughter's made some questionable choices, but she doesn't deserve to be collateral damage in some rich man's reputation management strategy." Sarah, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "I want to do whatever it takes to make sure the truth comes out. Richard lied to all of us, and I'm tired of being manipulated." As Diana looked around at this unlikely group of allies, she realized something had shifted. For 20 years, she had relied on Richard to handle difficult situations. But now, facing the biggest crisis of her life, she was finding strength in herself and in other women who refused to be silenced. "There's one more thing," Mike said. "Diana, I think you should be prepared for Richard to escalate this. If he's desperate enough to frame you for assault, he might be desperate enough to do other things to protect himself." "What do you mean?" "I mean you should be very careful. Men with a lot to lose sometimes make very bad decisions." Diana felt a chill, but she also felt a determination she hadn't experienced in years. Whatever Richard did next, she wouldn't face it alone. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. at the Plaza Hotel. Diana learned about it the same way everyone else did, from a breaking news alert on her phone. Tech Millionaire to address wife's alleged attack on pregnant mistress. Diana was sitting in Sarah's hospital room when the alert came through. Sarah was being discharged that morning, her infection finally under control. But the doctor wanted her to take it easy for the next few weeks. "He's really doing this," Sarah said, reading the alert over Diana's shoulder. "Of course he is," Betty Mitchell replied from her chair by the window. "He's going to get out there and play the victim before anyone can tell the real story." Mike Rodriguez had been monitoring the situation since early morning. He arrived at the hospital with a grim expression and a folder full of documents. "Richard's people have been busy," he said. "They've leaked selective information to 3 different news outlets. The story they're telling is that Diana discovered the affair, confronted Sarah violently, and caused the injuries that led to the infection." "But we have proof that's not true," Diana protested. "We do, but they have a head start and a professional publicist. We need to get our evidence out there before his version becomes the accepted truth." Elena arrived with Margaret Torres, the divorce attorney. Margaret looked ready for battle, her silver hair pulled back severely and her expression sharp. "Diana, we have a choice to make," Margaret said. "We can try to stay out of the media and fight this quietly through legal channels, or we can take this public and tell our side of the story. What do you recommend? Given that Richard is already controlling the narrative, I think we need to go public, but we need to do it right." Mike opened his folder and spread documents across the hospital room's table. "Here's what we have: security footage from Sarah's workplace showing exactly how she got injured. Medical records from when she arrived at the hospital, including her own statement about the cause of her injuries. Recorded testimony from Sarah about Richard's promises and financial support. And financial records showing a pattern of affairs and payoffs going back years." Diana looked at the evidence. It was comprehensive and damning. "There's more," Margaret added. "My investigator found something interesting. Richard's company has been under investigation by the SEC for possible accounting irregularities. If this scandal damages his reputation, it could trigger a deeper investigation into his business practices." "So he has more to lose than just his marriage," Diana said. "Much more. We're talking about potential criminal charges if the SEC finds what they're looking for." Sarah struggled to sit up in her hospital bed. "I want to be there." "Sarah, you just got out of the hospital," Betty protested. "Mama, I need to do this. I need to tell people the truth about what Richard promised me, about how he lied to both of us." Diana looked at this young woman who had been through so much in the past few days. Sarah's pregnancy was showing more prominently now, and she still looked pale and tired from the infection. but there was a determination in her eyes that reminded Diana of her mother. "Are you sure?" Diana asked. "It's going to be intense. There will be cameras and reporters and questions." "I'm sure. I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of being ashamed of something that wasn't my fault." Mike nodded approvingly. "Having Sarah there will be powerful. She's the victim in this situation, and seeing her speak will make it harder for people to believe Richard's version." Margaret gathered the documents. "Then we need to move fast. Richard's press conference starts in 2 hours. We need to be ready to respond immediately." An hour later, they were gathered in the lobby of the Plaza Hotel. Richard's press conference was being held in the ballroom, and Diana could see reporters and cameras being set up through the glass doors. "Remember," Mike said, "we're not trying to disrupt his event. We're going to let him say whatever he's going to say, and then we're going to present the evidence that contradicts it." Diana felt nervous but determined. She was wearing a simple navy dress that Elena had brought her, and she had pulled her hair back in a style that made her look professional and composed. Sarah, despite her exhaustion, had insisted on dressing carefully. She wore a maternity dress that emphasized her pregnancy and her youth. "I keep thinking about something my mama used to say," Sarah told Diana as they waited. "She said the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how hard people try to bury it." At 10 a.m. sharp, Richard took the podium. Diana watched through the glass doors as he addressed the crowd of reporters. He looked polished and confident, every inch the successful businessman dealing with a personal crisis. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. I want to address the rumors and speculation that have been circulating about my personal life." Richard's voice was smooth and practiced, the tone he used for corporate presentations. "My wife Diana has been struggling with mental health issues related to our inability to have children. When she discovered my relationship with Sarah Mitchell, she became violent and unstable." Diana felt sick listening to him lie so smoothly. "Sarah is a young woman who became caught up in a complicated situation. She never intended to cause problems in my marriage, and she certainly didn't deserve to be attacked by someone she had never met." "That's not what happened," Sarah whispered beside Diana. Richard continued his presentation, painting himself as a man trying to manage two unstable women while building a successful business. He expressed concern for Sarah's health and his unborn child, while subtly suggesting that Diana was dangerous and unpredictable. "My wife has a history of jealousy and erratic behavior. The fertility treatments she underwent for years included hormone therapy that affected her emotional stability. When she learned about Sarah, she completely lost control." Diana felt Elena's hand on her arm, steadying her. "It's all lies," Elena said quietly. "Everyone's going to see that." Richard was taking questions from reporters now. The questions were mostly softball inquiries about his business and his plans for supporting the baby. No one was asking the hard questions about his pattern of affairs or his financial deception. "My main concern right now is for Sarah and the baby," Richard was saying. "I've hired security to protect them from any further contact with my wife." That was when Diana had had enough. "Mike," she said, "how do we get in there?" "We don't. We let him finish, and then we hold our own press conference. We've already alerted the reporters that we'll be available immediately after his event ends." 30 minutes later, Richard's press conference concluded. Diana watched him shake hands with reporters and pose for photos, the picture of a concerned father and wronged husband. "Our turn," Margaret said. They moved to a smaller conference room that Mike had reserved. Word spread quickly among the reporters, and within minutes the room was full of cameras and microphones. Diana stood at the podium with Sarah beside her, Betty on Sarah's other side, and Margaret and Mike flanking the group. "Ladies and gentlemen," Diana began, her voice clear and measured, "I'm here to present the facts about what really happened over the past few days." She looked directly into the cameras. "My name is Diana Chen, and for the past 20 years, I believed I was in a loving, faithful marriage. 3 days ago, I learned that my husband has been living a double life." Diana presented the evidence methodically: the security footage of Sarah's workplace injury, the medical records showing her own statement about how the scratches occurred, the financial records showing Richard's pattern of affairs and payoffs. Richard Chen has spent the last 3 days trying to convince people that I attacked a pregnant woman out of jealousy. The truth is, I never laid a hand on Sarah Mitchell. The truth is, we are both victims of the same man's deception. Then Sarah stepped forward to speak. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I want to tell you about the promises Richard Chen made to me. Her voice was clear and strong, despite her recent illness. He told me he was going to leave his wife. He told me we would be a family. He told me his marriage was already over. Sarah pulled out her phone and began reading text messages. He wrote to me, Diana and I are like roommates. There's no love left between us. He wrote, after the baby comes, we'll get a place together. He wrote, I can't wait to start our life together. The room was silent except for the clicking of cameras. Richard Chen lied to his wife for 8 months. Sarah continued. He lied to me for 8 months. And when the truth came out, instead of taking responsibility, he tried to destroy both of us to save his reputation. Diana stepped back to the microphone. The truth has a way of surviving, even when buried under layers of lies. Richard Chen is not the victim here. He's a man who betrayed his wife, abandoned his pregnant girlfriend, and then tried to frame an innocent woman for a crime that never happened. The reporters exploded with questions. Diana and Sarah answered them calmly and thoroughly, presenting documentation for every claim they made. By the time they finished, Diana could see that the narrative had shifted. The reporters were no longer asking about her mental state or her violent tendencies. They were asking about Richard's business practices, his pattern of affairs, and his attempts to manipulate the media. As they left the hotel, Diana felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the satisfaction of fighting back and winning. The room erupted as Richard's carefully constructed lies crumbled. Within hours of Diana and Sarah's press conference, the story had completely changed. News outlets that had initially reported Richard's version were now running corrections and follow-up stories about his deception. Diana was back home in Westchester, watching the coverage on television with Elena and her sister Jennifer. Richard had not returned home since the press conference, and Diana wasn't sure where he was staying. Look at this, Jennifer said, pointing to the television. His company's stock price has dropped 12% since this morning. The business news anchor was discussing the potential impact of the scandal on Richard's tech consulting firm. Investors are concerned not just about the personal scandal, but about potential SEC investigations into the company's financial practices. Sources close to the investigations suggest that Chen may have been using company funds to support his extramarital affairs. Diana's phone rang. It was Margaret Torres. Diana, we need to talk. Richard's attorneys have been calling all morning. What do they want? To negotiate. It seems your husband is finally ready to be reasonable about the divorce settlement. Diana felt a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. What are they offering? What, $25 million? Plus the house, plus your business assets remain entirely separate. And here's the interesting part. They want a mutual non-disclosure agreement. Meaning Richard doesn't want you or Sarah talking to the press anymore. He's willing to pay a premium for your silence going forward. Diana thought about this. $25 million was more money than she could spend in several lifetimes. It was also vindication that her 20 years of marriage had been worth more than the paltry $2 million the prenup had promised. What about Sarah? They're offering her a substantial child support settlement, plus a lump sum payment. Her attorney thinks it's very generous. Her attorney, I referred her to a colleague who specializes in paternity cases. Sarah's not going to be left high and dry. Diana felt relieved. Whatever else happened, Sarah and her baby would be taken care of. There's something else, Margaret continued. The SEC investigation is moving forward. Whether you take the settlement or not, Richard's business problems are just beginning. That evening, Diana visited Sarah at her apartment in Soho. It was a beautiful space with high ceilings and large windows, the kind of place that probably cost $15,000 a month. Richard had good taste, even when he was setting up his mistresses. Sarah looked much better. The color had returned to her face, and she seemed calmer than Diana had seen her since their first meeting. How are you feeling? Diana asked. Physically, much better. Emotionally, it's complicated. Sarah gestured to the living room, and they sat down together. I keep thinking about how naive I was. All those promises he made, all those plans for our future. I actually believed him. You weren't naive. You were trusting. There's a difference. Mrs. Torres says he's offering me a good settlement. Are you going to take it? Sarah was quiet for a moment. I think so. I need to think about what's best for the baby. Fighting this in court could take years, and I need stability. Diana nodded. That makes sense. Diana, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you going to be okay? I mean, really okay? This whole thing has turned your life upside down. Diana considered the question. 3 days ago, she would have said her life was perfect. Now, facing divorce and the end of her 20-year marriage, she felt something unexpected relief. I think I am going to be okay, Diana said. Maybe better than okay. I've spent 20 years living someone else's version of my life. Now, at 52, I get to figure out what my own version looks like. What will you do? I don't know yet. Travel. Maybe expand my business. I've always wanted to mentor other women in tech, but I never had the time. Maybe now I will. Sarah smiled. You'd be good at that. You've been a mentor to me these past few days, even though I'm sure that's the last thing you wanted to be. You know what's funny? Helping you has helped me too. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm doing something that really matters. They talked for another hour about practical things: Sarah's due date, her plans for after the baby was born, Diana's divorce proceedings. It was strange, Diana thought, how quickly they had moved from being enemies to being allies to being something like friends. When Diana was getting ready to leave, Sarah walked her to the door. Diana, I want you to know something. Whatever happens with the settlements and the legal stuff, I'm grateful you didn't let him make us enemies. He tried to pit us against each other, but you were bigger than that. We're both stronger than he ever gave us credit for, Diana replied. A week later, Diana signed the divorce papers in Margaret's office. $25 million, the house in Westchester, and her freedom. Richard had also been forced to resign from his company pending the SEC investigation. Any regrets? Margaret asked as Diana signed the final document. Diana thought about the question. She was losing a marriage that had defined her adult life. She was starting over at an age when many of her friends were settling into comfortable routines. She was facing an uncertain future alone. No, she said finally. No regrets. That afternoon, Diana got a call from an unexpected source. Mrs. Chen, this is Dr. Williams from Mount Sinai. I have some wonderful news. Sarah Mitchell delivered a healthy baby girl this morning. 8 pounds, 3 ounces. Mother and baby are both doing well. Diana felt tears in her eyes. That's wonderful news. Thank you for calling. Mrs. Mitchell asked me to tell you that if you'd like to visit, you're welcome anytime. Diana drove to the hospital that evening with a bouquet of flowers and a gift bag full of baby clothes. She found Sarah in a private room, holding a tiny, perfect baby with dark hair and Richard's distinctive chin. She's beautiful, Diana said. Want to hold her? Sarah asked. Diana hesitated. This was Richard's daughter, the child that had destroyed her marriage and changed her life forever. But when Sarah placed the baby in her arms, all Diana felt was tenderness. What's her name? Diana asked. Hope. I named her Hope. Diana looked down at the baby's face. Hope was sleeping peacefully, her tiny fingers curled into fists. She was innocent of all the drama and deception that had surrounded her conception and birth. That's a perfect name, Diana said. As Diana held Hope, she realized that this baby represented something she had never expected, not an ending, but a beginning, for all of them. 6 months later, Diana stood in her new apartment overlooking the Hudson River. She had sold the Westchester house and moved to a modern high-rise in Manhattan. The space was smaller but filled with light, and every piece of furniture in it was something she had chosen herself. Gentle jazz music played from hidden speakers as she prepared coffee for her weekly lunch with Elena. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, and Diana could see boats moving slowly along the river below. "You're glowing," Elena observed when she arrived, her warm Puerto Rican accent as comforting as always. "I feel good," Diana admitted. "Really good. For the first time in years." It was true. Diana's tech consulting business was thriving. Without the constraints of being a corporate wife, she had been able to take on more challenging projects and expand her client base. She had also started a mentorship program for women over 40 who were transitioning into tech careers. "How's the divorce settlement working out?" Elena asked as they walked to their favorite cafe. "Better than I expected. $25 million goes a long way toward making you feel independent," Diana laughed. "I never thought I'd be a woman with financial independence after 50, but here we are." They settled into a table by the window, and Diana ordered her usual cappuccino. "Any word from Richard?" Elena asked. "Nothing direct, but I read in the business section that the SEC investigation resulted in some significant fines. His company survived, but he's no longer involved in running it." Diana felt no satisfaction in Richard's professional downfall, but she also felt no sympathy. He had made his choices, and now he was living with the consequences. "What about Sarah and the baby?" "They're doing well. Hope is 6 months old now, and she's absolutely beautiful. Sarah moved back to Dallas to be closer to her mother, but we stay in touch." It was an unlikely friendship, but it had become one of the most meaningful relationships in Diana's life. Sarah sent photos of Hope regularly, and Diana had visited them in Texas twice. "I have news," Diana said, unable to suppress a smile. "What kind of news?" Elena asked, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "I've been asked to speak at a conference next month. It's called Women Supporting Women Building Success After Setbacks. They want me to talk about midlife transformation and starting over." Elena clapped her hands together. "That's wonderful. You'll be amazing at that." "I'm nervous but excited. I never thought of myself as someone who had wisdom to share. But apparently surviving a very public divorce and rebuilding your life qualifies you as an expert in resilience." They were interrupted by Diana's phone buzzing with a text from Sarah. "Hope took her first steps yesterday. Wish you could have seen it. Sending video." Diana showed Elena the video of a wobbly Hope taking 3 uncertain steps before falling down with a delighted giggle. "She looks just like Richard," Elena observed. "She does, but she has Sarah's spirit, and hopefully none of Richard's capacity for deception." As they finished lunch, Elena brought up a subject they had been dancing around for weeks. "So, are you going to tell me about James Peterson? Or do I have to keep pretending I don't know you're dating someone?" Diana felt her cheeks warm. James was a fellow tech consultant she had met at a networking event 3 months earlier. He was 49, divorced, with a warm laugh and an easy manner that made Diana feel comfortable in her own skin. "It's still new," Diana said. "But he's different. He's honest. Really honest. Sometimes brutally honest. That must be refreshing after 20 years with Richard." "It is. When James says he'll call, he calls. When he makes plans, he keeps them. When he says he cares about me, I believe him." "Are you in love?" Diana considered the question. "I don't know yet, but I'm open to the possibility, and that's something I never thought I'd say again." They walked back toward Diana's apartment, taking the long route through Riverside Park. The autumn air was crisp, and the leaves on the trees were just beginning to turn. "Diana," Elena said as they reached the building, "I want you to know how proud I am of you. 6 months ago, you were devastated and lost. Now look at you. You're building a new life, helping other women, even finding love again. I couldn't have done it without friends like you, and without allies I never expected, like Sarah and her mother." "That's the thing about women supporting women," Elena said. "Sometimes your greatest strength comes from the most unexpected places." That evening, Diana attended her weekly support group meeting for divorced women over 40. She had been facilitating the group for 3 months, and it had become one of the most rewarding parts of her new life. Tonight, there were 8 women in the circle, ranging in age from 42 to 68. They met in a community center conference room, sitting in folding chairs arranged in a circle. The lighting was harsh fluorescent, and the coffee was terrible, but the conversations were real and healing. Diana, said Maria, a 55-year-old teacher whose husband had left her for a younger colleague. I wanted to thank you for something you said last week. What was that? You said that sometimes the worst betrayal leads to the greatest freedom. I've been thinking about that all week, and I think you're right. I spent 30 years trying to make my husband happy, and I lost myself completely. Now I get to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to please someone else. Nods and murmurs of agreement came from around the circle. I never thought of divorce as an opportunity, added Janet, a 48-year-old accountant. But that's what it's become, an opportunity to live authentically for the first time in decades. As the meeting continued, Diana listened to stories of betrayal and recovery, of women discovering strength they didn't know they possessed. Each story was different, but there were common threads: the shock of discovering lies, the fear of starting over, and ultimately, the surprising joy of building a life that was truly their own. You know what I realized, said Carmen, a 62-year-old nurse whose husband had hidden gambling debts for years. My ex-husband used to tell me I was too old to start over. He was wrong. I may be 62, but I feel younger now than I did at 40. After the meeting ended, Diana walked home through the city streets. Manhattan at night was alive with energy and possibility. People were going to dinner, to theater, to meet friends for drinks. The city was full of people starting over, reinventing themselves, pursuing dreams they had put on hold. When she reached her apartment, Diana found a voicemail from James. Hey, beautiful. I know you're at your support group tonight, but I wanted you to know I'm thinking about you. I had a great time at dinner last night, and I'm looking forward to our weekend trip to the Hamptons. Call me when you get this message. I love hearing your voice. Diana smiled as she listened to the message. James's honesty and directness still surprised her sometimes. After 20 years of marriage to a man who said one thing and meant another, being with someone who said exactly what he meant felt revolutionary. She poured herself a glass of wine and sat in her favorite chair by the window. The city lights twinkled below, and she could see the river in the distance. Diana thought about the path that had brought her here. 6 months ago, she had been a different person living a different life. The woman she had been would never have believed she could survive what she had been through, much less thrive because of it. Her phone buzzed with another text from Sarah. Diana, I hope you don't mind me asking, but would you consider being Hope's godmother? I can't think of anyone I'd trust more to help guide her through life. Diana stared at the message for a long moment. 6 months ago, Sarah had been the other woman who destroyed her marriage. Now she was asking Diana to play a role in raising Richard's daughter. Diana typed back, I would be honored. Hope is lucky to have you as her mother. As Diana prepared for bed, she reflected on something she had learned over the past 6 months. Life rarely unfolds the way you expect it to, but sometimes the unexpected turns lead to better destinations than you ever imagined. She had spent 20 years living someone else's version of her life, Richard's version, where she was the supportive wife who made his success possible. Now, at 52, she was finally living her own version, where she was the protagonist of her own story. Diana looked at herself in the bathroom mirror as she brushed her teeth. The woman looking back at her was different from the one who had sat in that Starbucks 6 months ago. This woman had laugh lines around her eyes and a confidence in her posture that hadn't been there before. This woman had survived betrayal and public humiliation and financial uncertainty, and she had emerged stronger. Her phone rang one more time. It was Sarah, calling from Dallas. I hope it's not too late to call, Sarah said. Hope just went down for the night, and I wanted to talk to you about something. Of course. What's on your mind? I've been thinking about starting my own marketing consultancy, working from home so I can be with Hope, but building something that's mine. You've inspired me to take control of my own life instead of waiting for someone else to take care of me. Diana felt a surge of pride. That sounds like a wonderful idea. What kind of help do you need? Advice, mostly. Business planning, client development, that sort of thing. I know you're busy, but if you could maybe mentor me through the startup process, Sarah, I would love to help you build your business. Women supporting women. Right, right. Diana, can I tell you something? Always. 6 months ago, I thought my life was ruined. I was pregnant and alone and scared. But meeting you, seeing how you handled everything with such grace and strength, it changed how I see myself. You showed me that women can support each other, even in impossible situations. Diana felt tears in her eyes. You showed me some things too. Sarah, you showed me that age doesn't have a monopoly on wisdom, and that sometimes the people who seem like your enemies can become your greatest allies. After they hung up, Diana stood by her window looking out at the city one more time. Tomorrow she would have coffee with a potential new client, lunch with James, and an evening meeting with her women's mentorship group. Her calendar was full of activities that energized her, relationships that fulfilled her, and work that challenged her. Diana learned that sometimes the worst betrayal leads to the greatest freedom. She had spent 20 years living someone else's version of her life now. At 52, she was finally living her own. The apartment was quiet except for the distant sounds of the city below. Diana turned off the lights and headed to bed, looking forward to whatever tomorrow would bring. For the first time in years, the future felt full of possibility rather than obligation. As she settled into sleep, Diana's last thought was something she planned to share at next week's support group meeting. Sometimes the end of everything you thought you wanted is actually the beginning of everything you never knew you needed. Outside her window, Manhattan continued its restless dance of ambition and dreams, and Diana Chen slept peacefully in the life she had built for herself.